Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Keep Indiana Learning. My name is Tim Arnold, and I am a digital learning coach with Keep Indiana Learning. And today I'm here with fellow digital learning coach Joe Cox for the second episode of our book study series, Keep Indiana Reading, on the book, The Shift to Student-Led. Whether you're here with us live today or you join us later on the Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel, we are here to address some of the following questions. Are you as a teacher working really hard and not quite seeing the results in your students? Are you ready to move from how can I to how can my students while increasing accountability and keeping your standards high? And if so, well, this semester-long book study is for you. Again, we're focusing on the book, The Shift to Student-Led by Katie Novak and Catlin Tucker, focusing on one chapter at a time. And today we're looking at chapter 2, workflow shift number 2, from whole group teacher-led to small group student-led discussions. So if you're beginning your journey into blended learning at UDL or you're an expert, you are welcome to read along, follow along with us, and join in the conversation. The comments will be on. But before we dive in, let's do some introductions. And Joe, why don't you start us off?
Hey, Tim, it's really great to be here this afternoon. My name is Joe Cox, and I am a digital learning coach for Keep Indiana Learning. My full-time job is at Yorktown Community Schools, where I have both taught middle and high school, and I'm in my 7th year as the District Technology Integration Specialist.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here with me today. And I am Tim Arnold from Richmond Community Schools. I'm a 34-year public school educator, 26 years in the classroom, and 8 more as a district e-learning specialist. And a Keep Indiana Learning digital learning coach along with Joe, and a member of the HEC board. So for chapter 2 here, we're going to hop right into the content. And one of the most important early things that I read that really stopped me in my tracks was the importance of unlearning for teachers. Unlearning. Not always doing it the way I've always done it. And based on new evidence, new information, new thoughts, new discoveries. And in the area of discussions or student discussions, I know that I started out in the area that it was my job to write the questions and to ask the questions, and my job to call on the students. And thank goodness for me, and thank goodness for students, some of those methods have changed, whether it be an in-person discussion, a smaller group discussion, or, as Joe will talk about later, an online discussion. But the goal here of unlearning the way we used to do things is for students to take that ownership of the process by asking one another questions. And I know for me, the cataclysmic change moment was when I was sent to do some training with something called Socratic Seminar. And Socratic Seminar, as a tool, led me down that path to student-led discussions. Socratic Seminar is generally about a text or a small bit of reading, but it can be about a video, it can be about objects, it can be really about anything you want it to be. But students are going to read or observe, they're going to mark up a text, they're going to create and ask their own questions. You can do it if you have a large group with an inner circle and an outer circle. When I found myself in that situation with students 25 to 35 in a classroom, the old term is the fishbowl. But we would do an inner circle and then switch places. But while you were in the outer circle, you were listening or you were working on a back channel, whether that be something that you did on paper or whether something you did digitally. That allowed everybody to be involved at all times. And we always left one seat open for anybody that just couldn't contain themselves and had to get in the discussion that was going on, so they could pop in and out. And we really, really worked on things like learning to agree and disagree with each other, asking good questions, asking for clarification, all those things that are a part of good civil discourse, which I think we would all agree we as adults aren't always the best example of. But this was the process that, through Socratic Seminar, that really led me to be more quiet and let my students shine. Students in Socratic Seminar then shifted from consumers of other people's ideas to producers and sharers of their own. And for me, that was the key. I knew it from the moment I started because I had students that I would nicely say were teacher pleasers. They did not have a clue how to react in a Socratic seminar because they didn't know what I thought. And all the kids that could care less started sharing all these amazing ideas that none of us knew they had because I hadn't provided the avenue for them. So for me, in the process of unlearning, Socratic seminar was a big key.
Yeah, I think today's students, we have to do some of this. It's time. It's time for change. We have to let students take ownership in the classroom. I've been in several classrooms this week and last week, working with some students on a specific tool, and I've learned it's changed a little bit in 7 years since I've been in the classroom. So these kids really, really need ownership in their learning. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about today that's brought out in the book is they suggest co-creating norms for your students. And again, we're giving students the opportunity to create these norms. They're going to take ownership in them. We're not just giving them rules and guidelines and regulations and say, you have to follow these. And so they gave some really good tips on how we can do that. And one of the things was before engaging in discussions that everybody would share their pet peeve and their essential trait. So, and this is pertaining to discussions. So if you're in a discussion, what's a pet peeve that you have? Mine might be people talking over other people. And maybe I've been guilty of it before. But you talk about what might really bother you. And then you talk about what patterns, so that's patterns in others, but then you talk about yourself. What is something that you might do that might bother others? And if that is you take a hold of the discussion and you really have points that you've got to get out there and you feel like you have to talk all the time, you need to be aware of that and tell other people that. So that's one of the things that they suggest. And then they suggest that you get small groups and then you allow students to draft those potential norms in small groups, establish that ownership of expectations. Again, not the teacher coming up with the rules and guidelines, but you in your small groups, and then bring it back together. And then as a class, you can come up with, if we're going to have discussions, here's the way it's going to happen, and here's what our expectations are. And this is so valid today as we look at posts online and as we see comments on articles. We've lost some of the civility that we've had, I think, since the pandemic. And so I think it's really, really important because I don't think that students are necessarily seeing this modeled, how to have, proper discussions. So I think this is really, really important. And then at the end, create that classroom agreement. Here's what we're going to do, will do, and here's what we're going to try to avoid in those classroom discussions. And then we can call it out, in a nice manner, a nice way when something comes up that we were going to try to avoid. So I think those are really good guidelines.
Yeah, I love all those. I really, really love that one pet peeve, one essential trait prompt for students. Yeah. And it made me think, I talked about Socratic Seminar a moment ago, and we had a set of guidelines that were student created or created in conjunction with me. And we just had those posted on our classroom wall as big as I could make them, so that if someone did need to call somebody out, whether that was student to student or student to teacher or however that was, they were right there for everybody to see. They could see them on the wall, and we could have a conversation about whether the exhibited behavior was following those or not. I actually went back and dug into some of my stuff and found a copy of the guidelines that I used to use that were student created along with me. And they included things like, we usually use a text because it was a social studies classroom, but referring to the text as often as needed during the discussion. Don't ever worry about taking somebody else's time. If you need time to go back to the text and find an idea, go ahead and do that. Students also said, hey, if you're not prepared, don't participate. We had an alternative thing for them to do, to observe, if that was the case. A lot of times they didn't want to admit that they weren't prepared, but once they realized there was a sideways out, didn't mean they were out forever or even out for the whole seminar, but it gave them some time to get themselves prepared and back in. Students also said to me it was important that no one stay confused, that you always ask for clarification. And that goes into that questioning aspect of seminar and of good discussions. One that my students really liked was they're going to act like adults, or maybe better than adults. You don't have to raise your hand. You're just going to take turns, because that's what we do. You know, when I'm talking to colleagues somewhere, I don't raise my hand because I have a question or a comment. So there's no reason for anybody to do that. So we need to learn that. But it's, you know, it's got to be taught. They thought it was important that everybody speak up so everybody can hear you. And I remember the day the student said, even if your voice cracks or squeaks, I was teaching 7th graders, so there's a lot of squeaks in there at that point. They thought it was important that everybody be a good and careful listener. Everybody's going to have a shot. Another big one was talking to each other, not to the teacher. So I had to train myself not to make eye contact early on, because I didn't want them looking for my approval or looking to see if I agreed with what they said or not. I kind of keep my eyes down and kind of keep thinking about, okay, who haven't we heard from yet, etc., so that they would talk to each other. And that really took a while. You mentioned using the words agree and disagree and telling why, as opposed to just attacking an idea. Trying to say that, or learning to say that in a way that doesn't sting quite as much. And then the biggest one, I think, that my kids told me in retrospect was they were glad to be in a place where not only was silence expected, it was encouraged, because that was evidence of thinking, that everything didn't have to be quick and fast, which only benefits those that already think they know the answer. So those are some of the guidelines that my students operated on, and I think they're good for just about anybody.
Yeah, I love that. Not speaking really quickly and silence is okay. We've learned wait time in our training as teachers and probably pretty good at it. But I think that when we're thinking of the answer while someone is talking, then, you know, we're not listening. And it's a bad trait. I've been guilty of it before. So that silence is okay. We're all thinking about this, kind of thinking through it before we speak. So I think modeling that, it's a skill. It has to be a learned skill. And I think that's great.
Yeah. So one of the other strategies that they talked about in chapter 2 was making sure that we offered some sort of scaffolding for students to help them remove the barrier to even entering the discussion. And I thought those were really important points. It's one of the things I really like about this book is that they start you out with some big ideas or some lofty ideas, but then they give you some very, very practical things to use, like previewing the discussion. Maybe you can provide a couple of the essential questions, or maybe you can have them start thinking about what the enduring understanding of this discussion might be. It doesn't mean you're giving anything away. You're just helping to prepare them for what they might see in the discussion, or meeting in groups prior to the discussion to review those norms that we just talked about, or select a certain protocol that they want to use during the discussion or after the discussion. I love what they said about multiple means of instruction, whether that be a choice board of how they want to interact during the discussion, or that back channel idea where there's some sort of a digital tool that they can use so they can be involved in answering the questions, even though it might not be verbal, or video to get them prepared for what they're going to think about in the discussion. And then some sort of note-taking options, whether it's, you know, a standard paper form or a note card or something that they're going to mark up. Any of those things can help reduce barriers for kids even before they enter the discussion themselves. So I thought those were really important to mention.
Yeah, those are great. And anytime that we can take away the fears and, you know, give students that safe space, and then it just becomes a natural in your classroom, you know, after you've done this, like just for your instance and doing it for a while, it just becomes a natural. Kids know what to expect. They know how to discuss now. And those are just takes away those, you know, like I said, those fears and anxiety of being in a real discussion in the classroom. Really important.
Yeah. They talked about using sentence frames as well, which I think are very important. And I've used these a lot in written form, but I didn't, I guess, think about using them in verbal form. You know, things like, can you please rephrase that? Or can you say or tell me more about that? Or I have a question about whatever it is. Or that's a valid point, but I feel this. Any of those things that you can provide them with so they can at least get started with their comment. Because I think a lot of times they have a lot of thoughts and feelings bundled up inside there, and they're trying to find a way to get them out, but they don't know how to get started. So just like it helps with writing, I think it can help with speaking. And that's something that I really hadn't thought about until I looked at this section. So I think that's something that I'll definitely use going forward.
Yeah, I've been in classrooms where kids are critiquing other kids' projects or work. I was in a particular middle school class, and they don't know what to say beyond "I like this" or "this is good." And so I talked with the teacher about teaching them how to phrase things such as "I wonder," "I see this, but what about this?" And giving kids, like you said, some of those sentence starters so that they have a place to start and looking and discussing a project with another student without feeling like they're attacking him. Nobody wants them to attack other students, but it's fine to say, "I wonder about this," or "Have you thought about this?"
Yeah, I love those. I love those. Again, just looking at reducing barriers to
Yeah.
participation. They also mentioned in this section some very specific discussion techniques, a couple that were new to me that I'm sure a lot of people out there use. One they called graffiti team time, where they put a question on a big piece of paper or on a whiteboard or somewhere, and either it can be passed around to people to respond to and add comments to, or the people can move from group to group and question to question. Again, just building in some pre-work for the discussion that's going to come, or actually having that as a part of the discussion process. Another one they mentioned was they called opposing sides, where you're going to research and defend a position against a partner, and you share the best evidence that you have, and then you switch partners or you switch sides or both, so that you're getting to look at both sides of an issue. You're getting to work on text references. You're getting to really work at close reading because you're looking for information, something that's very specific to you now because you know what you're looking for. And I like both of those ideas as well.
Yeah, really good, really good. And I haven't particularly used those, but I would definitely do things different if I went back in the classroom today. There's no doubt about it, for sure. Yeah, so one of the other things that they talked about was asynchronous online discussions. And if you're sitting in this or you're watching this and you've been to college, then you know all about those asynchronous online discussions where you respond to two people in your class. You read everybody's and you respond to two people, and it's so generic, and it's just going through the motions. It's and dependent upon when the person is completing the discussion, it may be a week or two before you even respond. So I really liked the suggestions they gave to make that more engaging. And the first thing was to let students write the questions. I mean, give the power back to the students. Let them write the questions. Of course, you're going to guide them. Of course, you're going to offer suggestions, but have them actually craft the questions. And then I'm so guilty of this. I do a lot of book studies at my school, and titling discussions is pretty generic. For instance, they gave the example, chapter 15 discussion. And I've done something like that instead of a catchy phrase such as the danger of the mob mentality. And that definitely attracts more attention than chapter 15. I need to do a better job of that. So give them a catchy phrase, some type of attention in creating this discussion question. Again, students are still doing this. You're just guiding them. And I loved, again, another scaffolding differentiation is to layer the questions. So start with maybe the most complex question, but then add in some subsequent questions below that so that are not quite as challenging, so that you're not eliminating students who may not be able to respond to that challenging question. I think that's such a great tip. We don't want to eliminate students from being able to participate. So maybe they read the first one and they're like, I really can't respond to that. But the next questions don't seem to be as intimidating. And so the tip they gave is always add media in this media driven world. Now, this is for students. When they're writing their discussion questions, they should always add media. And so I think their point was, we live in this media driven world. Students like to watch media. We have a lot of evidence of that occurring in at home and in classes. And by adding some type of media that goes along with the discussion, that you're going to pick the interest of students and give them a little more, maybe just a little more umph behind their completing this discussion question. So I really hadn't thought about that much, just always adding the media, but it makes a lot of sense, even if it's a graphic, but they suggested, some type of video. And then once again, have guidelines for participation. You've got to give kids some type of, and you're going to create these together as a group, but what should be the guidelines? What does participation mean? Is it responding to so many other responses? What should they do to fully participate in this? So I think that's really good. I need to take some of those tips myself in my asynchronous online discusussions that I do for book study. So it was really good for me too.
Guilty as charged. Yeah, we've got a blended learning group going on right now. We're in face-to-face 1 month and asynchronous the next month. And yeah, I got to get better at those asynchronous discussions. No doubt about that.
Right.
Love those ideas.
Yep.
So the last strategy that they shared in this chapter was self-assessing discussions. And I like using some questions before and some questions after when I do that in a discussion. I want students to be thinking about, I want a question I have before the discussion is, because I want to know whether they are, fully involved, fully ready, have thought deeply about the text or the object of the video or whatever it is we're discussing, and then follow that up with a question I have after the discussion. Now that I've been through this process, what do I want to know? What do I think? And then the part of the text or discussion that I was able to connect with the most was, I want to know that from them. I want to know something that they agreed or disagreed with that they heard. Maybe they didn't say anything about it, but now they've got a chance to share that. And that can be shared in a multitude of ways. And really, then you get into the heart of them self-assessing. There's going to be some sort of rubric. They can help make the rubric. Great.
Right.
But I want them to think about their own participation. Was I beginning level, developing, proficient, mastery? And then I like to add, I want to know someone else in the group or in the discussion whose thinking or contribution today impressed me. That's a great way for me as a teacher to find out things that maybe I missed if I wasn't near that group as they were discussing something. And then again, offering a choice and ways to do that, ways to share that information, whether it be written or video or audio or whatever the case may be. I really like that they offered so many suggestions there.
Yeah, and I think self-assessment is extremely valuable in everything that we do in the classroom. We've got to have students reflect on their learning. So in this and in every context in the teaching world, we've got to ask students to go back and self-assess and reflect. So really good ideas.
Okay, at the end of each chapter, they give some great reflection questions. A couple of them that I thought were pertinent to what we talked about here today. One was, as you think about fostering discussions in your own classrooms, whether in person or online, reflect on that unlearning process that you can or have gone through. We talked about sentence frames earlier. The one that I love, I think Joe mentioned it earlier, is I used to think, then I thought, but now I think. Right. Love that one. It's just as good for us as educators as it is for our students. Another question is, how can co-creating norms help build student ownership of the process, the culture, the climate in our classroom? And then finally, what additional supports or scaffolds might you make available to help students successfully engage or participate? Those are three key ideas. We discussed some of that, but there's so much more there. So if you get a chance, take a look at chapter 2 in the book. Joe, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's great to be here, Tim. Yeah.
And we'll be back in 2 weeks for our next session on chapter 3. And this session and all sessions will be in the playlist in the Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel. So if you weren't with us live today, catch us there and take a look at all our sessions. And if you get a copy of the book, hop in there and be ready for chapter 3 in about 2 weeks. So thank you so much for joining us.